All right, so get this. We're doing a deep dive today into the world of art.
Ooh, fun.
With Lee Berry's On Art, which is a collection of entries from their Dynaxiom. It's like basically a time capsule of thoughts spanning decades, all about creativity and how art shapes our world. Think of Dynaxiom as like this massive collection of notes, and On Art just pulls out any entry that even mentions art.
Interesting.
And these entries go all the way back to the 90s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're talking about some serious evolution of ideas here.
It really is a fascinating window into how, like, an artist's mind grapples with these big questions over time.
Totally.
And it's not just about the art itself, right?
Right.
It's how art intersects with, like, technology and society.
Yeah, and even our own, like, personal growth. So let's jump right in with entry 0004.
Okay.
Where Berry says, art gives you powers of observation that you couldn't have gotten otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
I love this idea. It's like art is like a secret weapon for unlocking a sharper, more perceptive version of yourself.
I think it's so true. And it's not just about appreciating, like, a pretty picture.
Right.
It's about training your mind to notice all those little details and patterns and connections that you might otherwise miss.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever noticed that after you look at a painting, you're suddenly more observant in your own life? Yeah, like you start noticing, like, the way the light falls on buildings or the subtle textures in nature. Like, art gives you this superpower to see the world with fresh eyes.
I know whenever I spend time at a museum, I walk out feeling like I can see everything just more vividly.
I totally get that.
Okay, so let's move on to entry 00038.
Okay.
Berry makes a pretty bold claim here. They say cinema is an untruthful medium and compare it to photography's potential to distort reality.
Right.
Untruthful. That seems a bit extreme, don't you think?
Barry's definitely being provocative here.
Yeah.
But I think what they're getting at is more about how artists shape reality rather than, like, outright lying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so think about how a film director uses close-ups to emphasize a character's emotions. They're not inventing the emotion, right?
Right.
But they are manipulating how we experience it.
So it's not about literal truth,
Yeah.
but about how artists use their tools to create a specific effect,
Yes.
certain feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that actually ties into entry 0198, where Berry talks about the power of concealing intent in art.
Okay.
It's like a magician's trick, right?
Interesting.
And sometimes not knowing exactly what the artist is trying to do can make the art even more engaging.
Oh, I totally get that.
Yeah.
It's like those optical illusions where you think you see one thing and then suddenly your brain, like, flips the image and you see something completely different.
Right.
That aha moment is so satisfying.
And I think it comes from that element of surprise, that sense of mystery that the artist has, like, carefully crafted.
And those aha moments can happen over time too.
Interesting.
Like, think about works of art that have, like, hidden symbols.
Right.
Or meanings that reveal themselves slowly or that resonate differently across generations.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit.
Sure.
And talk about how technology has impacted art. Entry 0595 points out how artists throughout history have, like, embraced new technologies. It's like there's this innate drive to experiment with new tools and push the boundaries of what's possible.
It's true. But technology isn't always a straightforward boon for art. Like in entry 000, Berry raises concerns about the surveillance capabilities of cameras, especially on phones.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's this sense of unease about how technology can distort truth.
Yeah.
And I think that tension between embracing new tools and being wary of their potential downsides is really interesting.
It's like every advancement comes with a trade-off. We gain something new, but we might also lose something in the process.
Exactly.
So how do we navigate that? Do we just accept that technology will inevitably change art, or do we try to hold on to those traditional forms?
That tension is reflected in the evolving definition of art itself. Like entries 0185 and 0963 both touch on how contemporary art is constantly challenging traditional ideas about what art can be.
Yeah, it's almost like asking, is anything art now?
Right.
I know what you mean. Sometimes I look at contemporary art and I think, okay, I get that it's pushing boundaries, but is it actually good? How do we even define good art anymore when the rules are constantly changing?
That's exactly the kind of debate that these entries spark.
Yeah.
They force us to question our own assumptions about art's purpose and meaning.
Right.
What do we think art should be? Where do we draw the line?
I like that.
Yeah.
It's not just about passively consuming art. It's about actively engaging with it and forming our own opinions.
Absolutely.
And that engagement can lead us to some pretty fascinating places.
For sure.
Let's talk about the creative process itself.
Okay.
In entries 0200 and 07.2, Barry delves into the artist's mindset, talking about the importance of both intention and happy accidents.
Mm-hmm.
I find this tension fascinating.
Yeah.
Is art about meticulous planning?
Right.
Or is it about letting go and seeing where inspiration takes you?
What do you think?
I've always wondered about that. It's like, do you need a grand vision before you even start creating?
Mm-hmm.
Or can you just stumble upon something brilliant while you're playing around with different ideas?
It's definitely a delicate balance.
Yeah.
And different artists approach it in different ways. Some artists thrive on structure and planning,
Right.
while others embrace a more intuitive, spontaneous process. Like, think about Jackson Pollock, who was known for his drip paintings. His process seemed chaotic, spontaneous, but there was still an element of control, a deep understanding of how paint behaves. On the other hand, you have someone like Saul Lewitt,
Okay.
whose conceptual art relied on these precise instructions that were executed by others. It's almost like he removed his own hand from the final creation.
Two completely different approaches, but both incredibly impactful.
Totally.
Okay, so we've talked about the artist's mindset,
Right.
but let's dive a little deeper into how technology has influenced art, especially with conceptual art.
Okay.
Entry 0846 really unpacks this idea, focusing on how everyday objects can be elevated to art status.
Mhm.
But then there's this whole question of knockoffs and unintended plagiarism. It's like, once an artist transforms something ordinary into art, can anyone else do the same? Where does originality begin and end?
It's a really prescient point, especially in today's world where ideas spread so quickly online. Think about Duchamp's famous fountain,
Okay.
which was just a urinal turned upside down.
Right.
It sparked this whole revolution in art.
Yeah.
But it also raises this question.
What's
If someone sees that and decides to make their own artistic urinal, is that a valid work of art?
Right.
Or is it just a copycat?
I mean, I get that conceptual art is all about challenging our assumptions about what art can be.
Mm-hmm.
But if it becomes too easy to replicate, doesn't it lose some of its power?
That's an interesting point.
Like, if I see a urinal in an art gallery, I might think, okay, that's interesting. Makes me think about the nature of art.
Right.
But if I see a urinal in every bathroom, does it still have the same impact?
You're right. It becomes about context,
Yeah.
intention, and the artist's unique perspective.
Right.
Like, a true artist might be inspired by Duchamp's concept, but they'll push it further, transform it into something new. A copycat just replicates the surface level without adding anything meaningful.
It's like the difference between being inspired by a recipe and just blindly following the instructions. A good cook might take inspiration from a recipe, but they'll add their own twist, their own flair to create something unique and delicious. And speaking of seeing things with a fresh perspective, Entry 0653 talks about how artists can make them both visible and relevant,
Right.
focusing on those tiny details that most of us overlook.
It's like they have this magnifying glass
Yeah.
that allows them to zoom in on the seemingly insignificant and reveal its hidden beauty or significance. They can take something ordinary and make it extraordinary simply by how they choose to frame it.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And speaking of framing, Entry 0479 talks about photography, putting a box around reality. It makes me think about how much control the artist has in shaping our perception. It's not just about what's in the frame, it's about what's left out.
Precisely. And that act of selection, that conscious decision about what to include and what to exclude, is what elevates a photograph from a snapshot to a work of art. Entry 0706 talks about this distinction, comparing a good photograph to a good image that happens to be a photograph.
Interesting.
It's subtle, but crucial.
It's like the difference between just pointing your camera at something
Yeah.
and really thinking about the composition, the lighting, the message you want to convey.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to the creative process itself,
Okay.
which Barry touches on in several entries. Entry 0714 in particular really resonates with me.
Okay, what is it?
It talks about surrendering to the moment, embracing those unexpected turns, and letting go of the big idea.
Interesting.
I think that can be really scary, but also incredibly liberating.
I think it's where the true magic of art can happen. Sometimes the most profound discoveries come from those unplanned moments, those happy accidents. It's about being open to possibilities, allowing intuition to guide you, and not being afraid to make mistakes.
It's like that famous Bob Ross quote, "There are no mistakes, only happy accidents."
I love that.
He made painting seem so effortless and joyful.
But he did.
But I imagine there's still a lot of skill and knowledge underlying that approach.
Absolutely. You can't just throw paint at a canvas and hope for the best.
Right.
It's about mastering the fundamentals, understanding your tools and materials.
Yeah.
And then having the confidence to experiment and let go of control.
Right.
Entry 0204 gets at this, saying that true creativity needs that foundation of craft.
So it's not just about spontaneity. It's about having the skills to translate those spontaneous moments into something meaningful and impactful.
Exactly. And speaking of impact, let's talk about how technology continues to shape the art world.
Okay.
Barry makes several observations about this, from the early adoption of photography to the potential for virtual art.
Entry 0961 really stood out to me. It talks about how technology opens doors to new kinds of art,
Right.
but it also closes doors that maybe should have stayed open. It's like this bittersweet realization that progress isn't always a straight line.
It speaks to that tension between progress and preservation. As new technologies emerge, we gain new ways to express ourselves creatively.
Right.
But we also risk losing traditional art forms or the skills and knowledge associated with them.
You know, it's like the debate between digital and analog music. Digital music is convenient and accessible.
For sure.
But some argue that it lacks the warmth and depth of vinyl records. It's like we've gained something, but we've also lost something in the process.
And that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to really think critically about how technology is impacting art and to make conscious choices about what we want to preserve and what we want to embrace.
Right.
Entry 1005 pushes against this declinist view of art, recognizing the importance of both past and future.
It's about respecting the roots of art while also being excited about the unexplored territories that lie ahead.
Exactly.
And speaking of unexplored territories, Entry 1061 takes us on this wild ride into the world of virtual art, where ownership and authenticity might be determined on the blockchain, with the artwork itself remaining unseen.
Wow.
This one really blew my mind.
I bet.
Art that you can own but never actually see.
Right.
What does that even mean?
It's a fascinating concept, isn't it?
It really is.
It really challenges our traditional notions of art as something tangible.
Yeah.
Something you can hang on a wall or display in a museum.
Right.
It raises so many questions.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean to own a piece of art that you can never physically see?
Right.
How do we assign value to something that exists only in the digital ether?
It's almost like a philosophical puzzle, right?
Totally.
It makes you wonder if the essence of art lies in its physical form or in the ideas and emotions it evokes.
Right.
And if it's the latter, then maybe the medium doesn't matter as much as we think it does.
And that's precisely the kind of thought-provoking conversation that Barry's observations inspire.
Yeah.
They challenge us to think differently about art's purpose, its value, and its ever-evolving relationship with technology and human perception.